We'll talk more about the draft, the NFL news and notes. Brought to you by BMW of Atlantic City. The ultimate driving experience is closer than you think at BMW of Atlantic City, just off exit 36 on the Garden State Parkway. John McMullen from 97.3 ESPN.com. FanRag Sports NFL at JF McMullen for our daily conversation on the NFL as we get close to the draft here. A lot of draft things will be in the conversation today, John. And how are you, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Mike.
As always, it's always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to, as we get closer to the draft, to start to pick your brain a little bit more on the direction here. We know the Eagles at 14, and if I were to say to you, okay, your favorite wideout and your favorite running back were on the board, and there was a corner that you just liked, maybe he's the third or fourth corner. Are you taking the corner, or are you taking the wideout or the running back?
For what spot the Eagles are in and how things are shaking out right now, I would take the running back or the wide receiver because unless Marcus Lattimore falls, and that's a possibility because the late skinny on him involves his hamstrings and potential chronic issues. So all of a sudden, if a potential top 10 pick drops a little bit, I would certainly seize him at number 14. But outside of that, I don't think there's another cornerback worthy of that spot. I think Sidney Jones would have been worthy of it before he suffered the Achilles injury, but he's out of the equation, at least till later in the process. So I think you'd be reaching. So to me, it would be take the best available skill position guy or trade down and get more value in a potential cornerback if you're hell-bent on going in that direction.
Yeah, John, so give me where's the cutoff at wide receiver? Like if these guys are gone, you move on from that spot.
Well, to me, the cutoff really is only one guy, and that's Corey Davis. And, again, this is for the Eagles. That's not to say Mike Williams is not deserving of being there, or potentially John Ross. My concern with John Ross is his health. There's a lot in his background as far as injury goes that I would not be comfortable with. So I kind of throw him off my board and nix him simply for that reason. And I think Mike Williams is redundant at this point. Mm-hmm. You don't need him because you have Alshon Jeffrey. So I think when you start to look at it logically, we can all say this player's great, this player's great, this player's great. They're all great, yeah, but sometimes they're not a fit. Sometimes there's injury concerns. And sometimes you have to look at what you need. To me, the Eagles at wide receiver, of those three top names, the only one they would need right now would be Corey Davis.
Yeah, look, the fact that this draft provides so much depth at corner, does that change your thinking in round one? Because it does for me. The fact that I think in round 2, maybe even 3, that I can find some suitable guys, I feel like that gives me the opportunity to be more creative at 14 because I'm comfortable at the guys I could get in round 2 and round 3. That's a different story if, hey, this is a shallow class, I got to get one of these guys at 14. But because I feel there's enough talent at corner that, you know what, I could go get a player for Carson Wentz. And you know what? I probably should be thinking about getting a player for Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and I think that's at least what Howie Roseman has hinted, and he'll speak again tomorrow, so we'll see. Doubt he's going to give anything up, but at least as far as philosophy.
I can see him saying, John, we are going to take at number 14. I can see him revealing that.
Yeah, he's obviously just going to go through the motions, and but he's been pretty consistent with philosophy, and his philosophy has been building up around Carson Wentz. Now, he could shift gears during the draft day and say we did that by bringing in Alshon and Torrey Smith and Chance Warmack and players like that, and say and throw us a curveball in that direction. But I think he's serious, and I think he wants to continue to build up around Carson Wentz, because there's still questions at running back. There's still questions at the wide receiver position, and he's going to be the franchise guy. So you want to have significant pieces around him. But you're right about the cornerback position, because it is very deep. And a lot of people have, up to 10 names in the top 50 or 60 players at that particular position. So you are going to be able to get a corner in the second round if you want to go in that direction. And I keep going back to the Jones injury, because I think it's so significant, because I think he's the guy who made so much sense. If you were going to stay at number 14, he would have been value at the 14th overall pick. Whereas I think Gary Conley, and I had this conversation with some people at the NovaCare complex yesterday, I think, he's raising up the boards late. He's a very sound player, according to scouts. But, boy, I just don't see the upside there at 14 versus getting a player in the second round who might be very, very similar athletically.
Yeah, John, it's interesting about Conley because he's played more than Lattimore, right? I mean, he was a guy that got the playing time with the Apple. I was going to say the kid from the Giants, Apple. He's been out on the field more. So some people look at him as more polished almost.
Yeah, and he probably is more polished. But again, that's not necessarily what you're looking for. You're trying to project, and you're trying to say, okay, he's going to be the better player 3 years down the road. And to be blunt, if you're arguing Lattimore versus Conley, the Ohio State guys, if Lattimore's healthy, well, that's not even a question. He's going to be better. He's just explosive physically. And he's just got so many more gifts to be a potential top 5 pick.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, is the difference between the two players. Not who's going to be more ready to play. If you're asking me who's going to be more ready to play probably day one, it's probably Conley. But that's not what this is about.
How much, 14, we talked with the receivers, they signed Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith. Does that change your thought process at all if you're Howie Roseman?
Well, it changes it from the Williams perspective. I truly
So it changes it on
no
player. It changes it on personnel, but not necessarily, hey, if I like a guy, John Ross, 14, and he's there, just because I signed to doesn't mean I'm not going that direction.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And because if you look at Torrey Smith's contract, it's really a one-year deal. For basically nothing. And arguably the Eagles could cut him this year, really. And it could be a Reuben Randall situation. And it wouldn't hurt them that much from the salary cap standpoint. So if you're looking at another receiver and you think John Ross is the guy and you're comfortable with the health aspect of it, and he's the home run hitter, yeah, you can go in that direction, because it's just signing Torrey Smith that's not going to take that avenue off the board. So if you're comfortable with him medically, yeah, he's still in the conversation.
Yeah, because it's a weak draft class for wideouts, in my estimation, but a very good one for corners, and I think that was the blueprint of the offseason. We'll go and get our wideouts in free agency because we don't think there's as many in this draft. And we'll go take as many shots at corner in the draft because maybe the class of corners in the free agency didn't really appeal to them all that much. And, the other underlining thing here is at running back, where I'm usually a proponent of not taking a running back in the first round. At number 14, if you have your choice of running backs, is that still in today's draft, today's day and age? I know that there's been some good ones that have come out in the first round in the last couple of years. But a lot of comparisons of McCaffrey, and I think McCaffrey would be a phenomenal fit. But keep in mind, a lot of Westbrook talk about him, catching the ball, punt returns, all that stuff. But keep in mind, Westbrook was taken in the third round. So are you a proponent of Christian McCaffrey in the upper part of the first round?
I am, because I like him so much as a player, but I am kind of contradicting myself, and I will admit it, because generally at the position, and the perfect example is a more traditional running back in Dalvin Cook. I'm not taking him at 14. I'm just not.
Yeah.
And to be honest, Fournette, who's going to be probably a potential top 5 pick, and most people think certainly top 10, I wouldn't take him either, to be honest, because of the devaluation of the position. Mm-hmm. We've seen it in the offseason about veteran running backs and the fact that no one will pay them. So it's going to be a short shelf life. You kind of know that at a running back. McCaffrey's a little different because he's so unique. And I understand the comparisons to Westbrook, but in theory at least, and again, I don't like comparing young players to proven veterans who were really, really good in this league and really stars. But from a skill set standpoint, and that's all I'm talking about here, he projects to be more versatile than Brian Westbrook. He can do more things. So if you use him correctly, I look at him as sort of, a Swiss Army knife. Yeah. He can do so many different things, and you can line him up all over the field. Plus, he can return kicks and return punts and do all that kind of thing. So I kind of look at him as more than just a running back, and that's why I value him a little bit more.
I'm with you. I'm in the same vein where I feel like over the years of doing this draft coverage and getting ready for draft and studying the stuff, and I would say, look, you could find a running back in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. There's no need to go that high. The fact, though, that the one thing, and I said this last year when we were talking about the Eagles and their issues on offense was, hey, the Eagles under Andy Reid and Donovan McNabb had a Brian Westbrook. This team this year was lacking a Brian Westbrook. This offense was lacking that style of player. So while I'm not a proponent of running back in the first round of a draft, that would certainly be an intriguing piece, I think, for not only Carson Wentz, John, but Doug Peterson as well. That Doug Peterson's offense, even going to Kansas City, where they had Jamal Charles and Charchandrick West, all guys who are in that mold. LaShawn McCoy, another one, all in that mold of a Brian Westbrook dual threat back that the Eagles certainly lacked last year.
Yeah, you also add need into the equation, and the fact that the Eagles have a significant need at the position, and that Ryan Matthews remains on this team, but only in name only till he can pass a physical. We all kind of know that Wendell Smallwood is not what they would want as a starting running back. And Darren Sproles has indicated he's going to retire after this season. And I don't think he's going to change his mind. I think that's the direction we're going. So you also have to put that into the hopper, and the fact that the Eagles need a running back. And if it's not McCaffrey at 14, it's certainly going to be somewhere else in the draft where they address that position.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. And then there's that third spot, which is the defensive end, which seems like is getting talked about the least. But is that maybe the most likely?
I wouldn't say that.
Well, I mean, I feel like people are zoned in on corner, wide out running back, those, and then it's like defensive end, yeah. And it seems that maybe of those positions, the defensive end spot is being discussed the least, but might be the one that's the most possible of occurring.
Yeah, I might be in a bubble because, I'm talking to too many people around the team that cover the team, and all they're talking about is defensive end. And all they're talking about is an edge rusher, and Charles Harris is the hot name right now. Derek Barnett obviously was in to visit earlier this week. So I think that's a significant position that's in the thought process of Joe Douglas and Howie Roseman right now.
If you real quick on that, when you looked at Joe Douglas,
that scares me.
when you looked at Joe Douglas, I know he's not the guy pulling the triggers in Baltimore or Chicago, but is that an area where those were drafts that he helped be a part of? Would they typically go that direction? Is that something that Baltimore valued?
Well, Baltimore's always valued edge rushers,
right?
I mean Terrell Suggs obviously for years and years. And he was a draft choice, and then they went out and got Elvis Dumervil for years. So they always had both sides of it. They play a 3-4, so it's a little different from that perspective. But they've always valued it, but everybody in the NFL values it. I mean, Gil Brandt, who's been around since the beginning of time and is the so-called godfather of the draft, he'll always tell you. And I heard him talking the other day, and someone asked him if someone has equal value at cornerback, and I forget the names they were using, in a defensive end, who are you going to pick? And he said, the pass rusher. You always pick the pass rusher. And that's
good information to have, right? To say, look, Joe Douglas values that spot, and if there's a guy there that they, is pushing their pile, and does it sound, you said you're in the bubble, does it sound as if that they are becoming more and more intrigued by someone at that spot?
Well, everyone thinks that. I can say that,
yes,
unequivocally. And the two names, as I mentioned, are Harris, who seems to be running up the board late,
yep,
and Barnett. Those would be the two names. Obviously, absent of a catastrophe, they're not going to have a chance at Myles Garrett. I think everybody would advocate taking him. But those are the two names people are kind of centered in on. And, yeah, I mean, the NFL mentality is it's if you don't have the franchise quarterback, you better get to the quarterback.
No doubt.
So meaning the most important position in football is obviously quarterback.
Yep.
No one denies that. Number two is the guy chasing the quarterback and the edge rusher. And the Eagles didn't have enough at that position. And I kind of wrote about that on 973ESPN.com yesterday. It wasn't Brandon Graham's fault. It was Connor Barwin. It was Vinnie Curry. And whether Chris Long is enough and perhaps Vinnie coming back and playing better, I'm not sure the Eagles are comfortable with that.
John, in 2014, going back, you just talked about quarterback, and I bring this up because there's some reports that the Browns could move not their first pick for Trubisky and draft him there, but move their second pick and try to get themselves in position to draft him. I've been a strong proponent against this, but I go back to 2014 where you had Blake Bortles was drafted number 3. You had Johnny Manziel, who was drafted 22nd, and you had Teddy Bridgewater taken at number 32 of the first round. You can make a strong argument that the better quarterbacks were drafted a little bit later. And I go back to, are the Cleveland Browns realistically going to move? Now, I know they're stockpiled with a lot of picks, but are the Cleveland Browns, again, going to do something drastic just to chase this ghost of finding a quarterback, a franchise quarterback, that really a lot of times lucks into a team's lap?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's the Cleveland Browns, so you kind of never know what they're going to do and never makes sense. They were sitting there, and they had the opportunity to solve the problem last year and decided Carson Wentz wasn't worth it and traded out. And one of their arguments for doing that was they thought this class was better than the Goff-Wentz class.
Right.
And now we fast forward, and now all of a sudden people say, not necessarily the Browns, people say it's not as good. And the top prospects of this year are not as good as Jared Goff and Carson Wentz. And that's a scary proposition if they're not as good as Jared Goff, at least.
That's true. That's a scary proposition.
Yeah, it's very scary. It comes down to the belief you have in the player. If they truly believe Mitchell Trubisky is a franchise quarterback, they should take him, and they should take him at number 1 overall, and they shouldn't hem and haw. and they shouldn't concern themselves with the second first-round pick and getting over a team. Somebody's going to trade up. If San Francisco doesn't take a quarterback, somebody's going to trade up to one of the top spots and grab a quarterback they like. It could be Deshaun Watson. It's just the nature of the league and the desperation of the position.
Yeah.
And we talk about it all the time. It happens almost every year. You mentioned that the Bortles year,
because Derek Carr was the fourth. Derek Carr was the fourth guy taken in that, the fourth quarterback taken.
And Bridgewater would have been better. It was better until he got hurt. But that's
right. The third quarter, and then of course Garoppolo was also taken in that draft.
Yeah, and let's be honest, he's thrown 94 passes. So the talk about Jimmy Garoppolo is about.
Well, the fact that you drafted Johnny Manziel in that draft and are talking about trading.
Than that.
You're talking about trading for Jimmy Garoppolo.
It's interesting because, teams quickly forget about things. And I look at that year. You don't even have – you can look at last year. Recently, the Cowboys were kind of trolling about Paxton Lynch and his work ethic. And, everybody in this league knows that the Cowboys move mountains to try to get Paxton Lynch. Everybody knows it. And they ended up with Dak Prescott, and it worked out for them. And they're happy about it, and they're crowing about it, but that's not their plan. And you mentioned Johnny Manziel. The Cleveland Browns traded up to get him. Obviously a colossal failure. Guess who they were battling? The Minnesota Vikings, who were trying to trade up to that exact pick to take not Teddy Bridgewater, but Johnny Manziel.
Yikes.
And it didn't work out for the Vikings, and they got a very good quarterback 10 picks later. Unfortunately, injury derailed that.
Yeah, that's a shame.
But they were crowing about that before the injury. That's not what their plan was. So a lot of it has to do, you're right, with luck. But if you believe in a player at that position, you better take him. And the sort of hesitation, you can't worry about that. You have to trust your scouts and your coaching staff and the people who are going to develop the player. Now, for Cleveland Browns fans, that's probably a scary proposition.
Should be interesting. What do you think of Mahomes, by the way? Because I just threw out the quarterbacks, and his name is kind of creeping in there. But when I go back to that 14 draft, which is a bunch of quarterbacks that are kind of like, Bortles and Manziel and Bridgewater, it sounds that this class is similar where you're not enthralled with anybody. What do you think of Pat Mahomes?
Well, you look at certain traits and you say, he's got one of the strongest arms this league has ever seen. It's almost Brett Favre-like as far as arm strength. And I wrote about this on FanRag Sports. The mechanics are a mess. I mean, to a degree where it's not even freshman quarterback in college worthy of the old days. I mean, they're a disaster.
Right.
So you have to work with him from square one and sort of rebuild his footwork, his throwing motion, everything. And that's a difficult process. So that's my concern with a player like Mahomes. But you said that about Bortles. You could have said that at Manziel. You could say that about Goff. Disaster.
Yeah.
We talk about Carson Wentz working on his mechanics. Carson Wentz is like, I said it earlier this week on the show, he's like Drew Brees compared to Jared Goff when it comes to mechanics. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem because of the shifting landscape in college. It's an issue with almost all of these quarterbacks because of the way they're taught at the college level.
Right. A lot of NFL stuff throughout the rest of the week and next week as we get ready for the draft. John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter. FanRag Sports NFL covers the league nationally and, of course, locally here for 97.3 ESPN.com on the Eagles, as we will, of course, get you ready for pick number 14 in all its entirety right here. Listen to live coverage of the draft Thursday night. All right, man, we're getting close. 8 days. Can't wait.
I'm very excited. I think I'm going to start today to try and get there.